Good morning. And it is a good morning because we've got this. I have some major breaking news today. And what that is that Donald Trump, who I will refer to in the future as the Cheeto, because Cheeto, he cheats and he is covered in orange dust. The Cheeto has the worst lawyers in the world. And his stupid and sadistic agenda is going to be basically locked up in litigation for a very long time. And no, I am not minimizing the harm he is causing or the chaos he is creating. But here's the deal. We have been through this before. And what we know now, more than ever, is we can't control the outcome. And we are not going to wear ourselves out. We are going to build ourselves up. And so, toward that end, I've got a few things we're doing today. And yes, my friends, we are doing Prism, right? Prism standing for physical health, relational health, intellectual health, spiritual health, mental health. And I even have a new design thanks to Michael. We're going to go through that each show to build ourselves up. But more importantly than that, I am going to have experts on when they are available and when the time is right. And the time is right today. We are having law professor, federal courts expert, and often before the United States Supreme Court, Steve Vladeck on the show. He will be here at 9. And I am so thrilled because Steve is going to talk to us about the deluge of emergency orders. He's not going to go through them all. He's just going to tell us what to expect at the United States Supreme Court. And given his background, given my legal background, I'm going to cut through the nonsense on this show going forward, because we could spend all of our time in our lives reacting. And we don't need to react. We need to respond where it is appropriate. So that's the first thing. We are bringing the legal experts. The second thing is I'm going to promise you what I think nobody in legacy media or whatever you call what I'm doing here, independent media, I don't know. Nobody I have heard so far has promised you that from today all the way through the end of his regime, whenever that shall be, you will never hear his voice here. Taub Live is a safe space. You will not hear the Cheeto's voice. Donald Trump, the Cheeto, will not be here. Now, sometimes there is an image I will be sharing with you, but his face will be scratched out, scribbled out. It reminds me when I was a kid and I had learned about the Holocaust, whenever you would open a dictionary, even a dictionary at the library, and you went to the H word to look for Adolf H., his face was always scribbled out. So I'm not saying that you should deface books. I'm just saying that I will not present to you his face unless it's defaced and unless it's necessary, because we need to decenter him. Now, that being said, I'm also promising you that I'm keeping my eyes on the real danger, because the problem here, as Joe Biden said, is the oligarchy. And the problem we have is that the mainstream media and the major tech billionaires, they're all in the tank right now for Donald Trump, in part because they're all in the tank for him. It's like the worst kind. It's like Nazi white supremacist survivor, right? But the thing is, if we recognize it, then we have much more power than them, because they are all entangled with each other now. And it's so very clear to me what is happening, which brings me to something. I am talking about the inauguration, but it brings me to what the most important thing is, which is this. I'm hinting at this now, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what Donald Trump said yesterday. Very little, because it was very little that was surprising. The most important thing we need to face is that the richest man on the planet, Elon Musk, yesterday at an inauguration event for the US president, President Cheeto, that Elon Musk performed not once, but twice, a full-on Nazi salute. And it was not an accident. And the newspapers across the globe have recognized it, as has every expert in fascism, and as anyone who has two eyes and a functioning flipping brain. And there are some exceptions. So what I need to do now, as much as I don't want to, is I am going to show you that video clip. Donald is not in it. Elon is. But I am promising you that I am focusing on Donald's enablers because they are the problem and we must never forgive them. And we have to figure out how to take away their billions of dollars, because what their billions are doing is they have ushered in, and I mean through taxation, that's a separate issue. These terrible people have, for personal gain, ushered in a second Donald Trump, a Cheeto presidency, and they are supporting the man who is pulling the strings, Elon Musk, who is an open fascist, and we've said it before, he is supporting the Nazi party in Germany right now that is being led, and we'll talk about that, by one of the grandchildren of one of the former Nazi officials. This is no joke. And so I'm going to show you this right now, and then we are going to talk about it and apologize. I'm apologizing to you because this is not the greatest thing to be watching on a Monday morning, but this is what we are seeing in America. America has been taken over by Elon Musk's puppet, Donald Trump, the Cheeto, who apparently most of America who decided to vote, thought was worthwhile. Okay, let's play it.
And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you.
Now, I did not show you this second. He turned around and he did it again. So I'm going to play this one more time. After he did it facing forward, he turned around to the crowd in the back, because there's always a crowd in the back. Okay, let me show you this. He is thanking everyone for voting for Donald. He's thanking the Cheeto himself. Watch this, and you tell me. They're trying to say, I haven't heard Elon say this because I don't follow him, but some people are saying it's a so-called Roman salute. That is bullshit. Let me play this for you.
And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you.
Okay, friends. That is a Nazi salute. And let me just give you I just think it's really important that you understand who is recognizing what is in front of us, because remember what we talked about here, which is as follows. Remember how we talked about not ever supporting the lie, right? And this is what we said. The simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. So when Cheeto was elected the first time, the big lie was about crowd size. We had to say it was the biggest crowd in the world. That's what Sean Spicer did. Today, they don't have that problem because, of course, as you know, Donald Trump, afraid of cold, moved everything into the rotunda and even took down the jumbotrons on the Capitol or on the mall, wherever they were, because he didn't want people to see small crowds, not just because of the cold. So there was an arena, 20,000 people, and this is where Elon Musk was at one of the events. Now, let's take a look and see what experts actually say about this, right? I think this seems obvious. And again, you don't need an expert. We have Mike Stuckberry, and let me read what he said. I studied the Nazis at university, taught the history of Nazi Germany on 2 continents, and wrote for major newspapers about Nazi Germany. I am internet famous for fact-checking chuds on the history, ideology, and the policy of Nazi Germany. That was a Nazi salute. Now, I don't know, you guys in the chat, does anyone think that was not a Nazi salute? I mean, does it make a difference that to know that Elon Musk is supporting the Germany's far right party? It's called AfD, and its full name is Alternative for Germany, right? He thinks it can save Germany. That's what he has said. This is the far right Nazi party in Germany, and he does this gesture. Now, let me go to someone else. I love Katie Fang. She's a dear friend of mine, and she still is an MSNBC host, The Katie Fang Show, and she often subs for others. And she said this when she shared this video link of Elon Musk and his Nazi salute. Katie said, this isn't a seems like or appears to be event. It was intentional, deliberate, and unequivocal. Now, she has to say that because our major newspapers are soft pedaling it, but people we can trust won't. It's kind of like a litmus test. You know how there's some people when they are asked, did Joe Biden win the 2020 election? And if they respond, Joe Biden is president, that's a litmus test to know you should not trust them. Another litmus test is if anyone suggests that that was not a Nazi salute, then I would tell you immediately that you should understand they are not to be trusted. So let me add this to the stage. I'm sorry to tell you, but the Anti-Defamation League, which over the years has done such incredible work, but recently under the current president has become, and again, I believe that Israel should be a state. I also believe in Palestinian liberation, but ADL has become a far-right organization. Not far right, I'm sorry. It has been an advocate for Donald Trump, and it has supported the far right in Israel. This is the ADL wrote. I can't believe this. And they said, it seems that Elon Musk made an awkward gesture in a moment of enthusiasm, not a Nazi salute. But again, we appreciate that people are on edge. The ADL wrote, in this moment, all sides should give one another a bit of grace, the benefit of the doubt. Okay. F you, ADL. I am shocked by how far this organization has fallen. If you support the ADL, you shouldn't. And when I grew up, we called people like this capos. Capo is a German term for the people, the Jews who helped usher other Jews into the gas chambers. This is bullshit. And by the way, in my view, you're a capo if you hurt other people, not just Jewish people. This is supporting a full-on Nazi. And we have alternatives. Let me tell you. And I'm going to have her on the show. The head of, there's another organization, and I'm going to pronounce Amy's wrong. I'm going to call Amy's name wrong. I think it's Amy Spolotnik, and she will correct my pronunciation. But Amy runs an organization called the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. And they said this the right way. And they said President Trump's, first of all, they have denounced Elon Musk, and they have also denounced the executive actions by Donald Trump. Okay, I'm going to pull that down. So if you want a Jewish organization to support, again, the JCPA, the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, consider them. They're a good group. Very egalitarian, very humanistic, not far right. Okay, guys. So that happened. And it's, I have to say, not fine when the richest man on the entire planet did a Nazi salute, two of them back to back at an inauguration event for the American president. It's not fine. And it's not fine that he is interfering in the election in Germany, he's trying to interfere in England, but he is supporting in Germany. He wants the far right Nazi party to come to power. This is a problem for the world. He is world enemy number one. So that is what I will say about that. Now, the other thing that I want to say before we get to Prism is this. We've got to keep our eyes on the enablers and the oligarchs. Sometimes that overlaps. What you're looking at here is at the front row that Donald Trump at his rotunda inauguration placed the oligarchs in the front row. right? You see Mark Zuckerberg there. You see Jeff Bezos and his second wife, who is wearing a beautiful suit, but it looks like she has a bra under it where she's exposing her beautiful form, which I find inappropriate. But that's none of my business. And then you see Musk, and then there is another tech executive there. What you should know is, again, is that they were seated in front of the cabinet. Now, this on the good news front. Yesterday, okay, let me just back up. I know that you've probably been upset that this unelected group called DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, when it's not a department, which was headed up by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Apparently, Ramaswamy has been pushed off the boat or kicked off the island. Well, you'll be pleased to know that yesterday there were 3 separate lawsuits, my friends, filed and against various defendants, mostly the Office of Management and Budget, as well as sometimes against Donald Trump and sometimes also against this Doge enterprise. And these lawsuits are incredible. One of them was brought by Public Citizen, that organization that was started by Ralph Nader that still does amazing public interest work. And they had some plaintiffs there, including a union for public employees. There also was a second lawsuit brought by my union, the American Federation of Teachers, and other plaintiffs. And there's a third one, and I don't remember who brought it. And what's incredible about these lawsuits brought just yesterday is they went into federal court to challenge the way in which Donald Trump is leaning on this private organization for advice, like a private secret shadow cabinet, because this violates, they argue, a federal law that prohibits this kind of secretive meeting. And it's called the Federal Advisory Committee Law. And these basically these 3 instant lawsuits are there to challenge the way in which this advisory committee is conducting its work. And in fact, yesterday, Donald Trump, in an executive order, said that this group would modernize federal technology and software, right? But the big problem, again, is that these groups, including my union, are arguing that this is a violation of federal law. We'll get into that later, but I'm very super stoked about that. Now, my friends, about that inauguration, I'm so proud that I did not listen and I did not watch. I'm finding out, again, I'm not reacting and I'm not subjecting myself to that Orange Cheeto's voice or his face. And this is so important. Some people say, well, it's newsworthy and we have to. No, I can look at his words on paper, because here's the deal. His entire inaugural speech, someone like Dan Dale went through and other newspapers and fact checked it. Here's the problem. Have they not learned that every time you fact check something, and it's the same lies he always tells, you repeat his lie first, lifting it up. And so that gets repeated. So I don't need to tell you that Donald Trump lied and lied and lied and lied. And none of the lies are important, because all of the lies are done to further his plans and his announcements. So all we should talk about are his plans and his announcements. And as you've probably heard, late last night, he did what he said he was going to do. But some people are now shocked by what he has done. Donald Trump has commuted the sentences of around 14 of the people convicted for being violent during people either charged or convicted of seditious conspiracy. Those folks got commuted sentences, so they weren't pardoned, but they can come out of prison. And the rest of them, more than 1,500 people, including people who acted violently, have been pardoned. That happened yesterday. And it doesn't at all surprise me, guys. Right? And I see Steve Vladeck is here. Hey, Steve, I'm waving to him in the green room. We'll have him up. That shouldn't surprise any of us, right? This is what Donald Trump promised to do. And, you know, the deal is, and this is where I feel like I have this photo. Shoot, you guys. I thought I had pulled it up. Oh, here we go. So I'm going to show this to you. Let me make this a little bit larger. So Donald Trump is pulling the rug out from under people. Many people thought, oh, he won't pardon the violent folks. Well, he did. Here's another thing that happened yesterday. Remember how Donald Trump, or the Cheeto, promised that he would instantly end the war in Gaza? And you know how he was trying to take credit the other day when we had Joe Biden, although working with someone on Donald Trump's incoming team, get that ceasefire and deal to get hostages released? Well, guess what Donald Trump said yesterday? A reporter asked him, how confident are you that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza? And you know what Donald said? Cheeto said, I'm not confident. That's not our war. It's their war. And then he added, Gaza is interesting. It's a phenomenal location. People, we told you that they wanted beachfront condos there for Jared's company. This is disgusting and it's not surprising. And as you know, you don't have to look at his face because I have scribbled it out. Now, here's a screenshot. This is something I put up. I don't need to show you the video, but one of the guys, just so you know, who had his sentence commuted was someone who had smashed the window. You can sort of see that close up there. He was the Proud Boy who smashed the window to get into the U.S. Capitol. Yes, and the shaman himself, he is also not just had the guy who smashed the window because he was initially charged with seditious conspiracy, he's had his sentence commuted. I think the shaman has basically been pardoned and is free or will be free shortly. Now, one more thing to say, which also came up the night before the inauguration, and I don't know if this is meant just to create a reaction or if it's true, but it's disturbing. Donald Trump said about Musk, he knows those computers better than anybody. All those computers, those vote counting computers, and we ended up winning Pennsylvania like in a landslide. Okay, obviously the implication being that he's somehow confessing that Elon Musk interfered, maybe through some sort of technological way or through satellites, who knows? He's implying that the election was rigged. And I don't like to say things like that because there's really no evidence other than Donald Trump saying that. But I do think if I were law enforcement in Pennsylvania, I would want to look at that. Obviously, Donald Trump himself is immune, at least while he is I shouldn't say immune. He can't be charged while he is in office, but we should definitely, if I were in Pennsylvania, take a look at what Elon Musk has to say. Now, I've got 5 more minutes before Steve comes on stage, so I want to do 2 things. Or 3 things. I want to go through the new Prism logo that we talked about. We'll get more into that later. Secondly, I want to do our person of the day. And finally, we get to do Crazy Town. So friends, remember, I talked about, let me just go back. I talked about this idea. I just kind of spontaneously came up with this idea before our Friday live that we should be focused on our physical, relational, intellectual, spiritual, mental health. Well, Michael helped me create, look at this design. And don't yell at me that you think it's like copyright infringement or trademark infringement from Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, because every prism looks like this. Trust me. Now, this is what Michael did. So I'm going to move this now off stage for a second. And you can actually see how it looks like this. Oops. Okay, well, that's how it looks. And what he did is this. You're going to die. We've got the merch. So this is what it's going to look like. This is a mock-up. He just printed this on paper, but this is what a mug would look like. You see? Anyway, you can't really see it that well. He's going to make me a mug. I'm very excited. So every day that I come on the show, I will have one. And maybe I will even open a Shopify store. Who knows? That's kind of like, I know law professors aren't supposed to do that kind of thing, but you know what? Norms went out the window. So what the heck? Now, let me tell you my person of the day. It is KBJ. And oops, here we go. I love this. Christopher Webb over on Blue Sky had this to say. I think you can see this shell necklace around her neck, and it is designed to look a lot like, is the word jabot, but the collar that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Steve can correct me, but the Ruth Bader Ginsburg always wore this beautiful collar whenever she read a dissent. And this is, you look at KBJ's face, and she is all of us. Let me read this. At the inauguration, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wore a distinctive collar adorned with cowrie shells, which are believed to offer protection from evil in African traditions. This choice mirrors the late Justice Ginsburg's practice of using collars to convey a message. I love that. Now, one last thing before Steve goes on, we have to do Crazy Town. And today, my friends, Crazy Town is the brain of a certain billionaire, a 500 billionaire, the richest man in the world, who, because of his wealth and power, cannot get any help with what appears to be, but is not documented, a, shall we say, serious ketamine habit. So I think we are going to play our music and you are going to watch this. This was him at the inauguration. I almost feel like I should play it while I play this video of him. Here we go, guys. Yeah, I'm going to actually back this up and play it one more time for you with Crazy Town going because it really works. Here we go. Okay, that is most of the show, but now we have the amazing Professor Stephen Vladeck, who I can't believe he is watching me do this because I would say that, Steve, I swear to you, when I teach civil procedure, it's by the book. It's not this nuts, I promise you. Okay, let's bring Steve on stage. Hey.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you feeling this morning about the chaos that will ensue in the federal courts?
Tired. I was struck as all of those executive orders were dropping last night that during the first Trump term, I felt like this stuff was more spaced out, right? That the only really big thing President Trump did in his first 10 days in office, the first time around, was the first iteration of the travel ban. And I feel like, Jen, we have 30 travel bans. And trying to figure out how to keep track of all of this, trying to figure out which pitches to swing at, trying to figure out sort of how to help folks sort out the wheat from the chaff, I think is really going to be both an important project for people like us and a really challenging one because there's
Yes.
a lot of there's a lot of stuff in here.
Steve, I feel that way. And in fact, earlier in the show, I said that's what we were going to try to do today, or get a framework. And maybe we'll have to have you back. And just one, you can mention some of them that maybe just won't fly, but what's ahead. But this happened to me a few months ago. My main area is banking law. And when you sort of heard these noises about maybe they'll get rid of the Fed, and I'm part of this. I'm part of this group called Better Markets on this faculty advisory board. And I mentioned this to folks and, Simon Johnson and Kate Judge. And, we kind of decided, well, we can't just focus on the crazy, right? We've got to actually focus on things like the basics, because while they're distracting us with the crazy, then we may sort of lose our energy to focus on what we can make a difference on. So what are you, in terms of yesterday's orders, I guess the political perspective might be it's good that he's doing this because people maybe will regret it. I don't know. But from a legal perspective, what do you think? What are you focused on among them, and what do you think is going to happen next?
So I think the three big flashpoints for me are the immigration-related orders, including but not limited to birthright citizenship. I mean, birthright citizenship is visible and evil, but also probably the most obviously unlawful of all of these things. And
right.
There's the ACLU has already filed a lawsuit in New Hampshire challenging that executive order. We're going to hear a lot more about litigation in the First Circuit in New Hampshire and Maine and Massachusetts and Rhode Island, I think, in the coming months. But so it's not an accident that they filed this in New Hampshire. But there's also asylum restrictions. There's limits at the border. There's the resumption of, the Title 42 sort of COVID-based limits on asylum. I mean, there's about 10 different immigration programs here, all of which are going to be already have been challenged in court. many of which are going to get struck down. So one bucket to me is immigration.
Okay.
The Schedule F, the reinstitution
Yeah,
of
can you unpack that for
yeah.
people? Because we do have some in our group, some federal employees who watch,
Yeah.
but some might not know what that is.
So Schedule F was this misbegotten effort by the first Trump administration to basically convert not all, but much of the civil service in the federal government into what are called political positions, basically positions where there aren't, statutory protections against being fired at will, where, the current president can dictate who's going to be, the assistant cafeteria manager at the cafeteria at the, Kennedy Space Center. I mean, right, like
And,
all the
and
way down
implicitly, it's like loyalty tests all the way down then.
or whatever. I mean, whatever the incumbent president chooses to prioritize, right? It's
Okay.
basically it's the evisceration of the civil service.
Right.
And that's back with the vengeance in one of the executive orders last night. That too is going to be challenged as soon as anyone is sort of acted against, right, based on the language of Schedule F.
Right.
And then to me there's the sort of the broader like national security ish stuff.
Oh my
in this.
God. Yeah, will you
Um,
mention that? Because that kind of freaked me out. I try not to react. I'm trying to respond, but that made me uncomfortable.
So, I mean, I think the one that is getting the most headlines is Trump's assertion that we are, in fact, being invaded across the southern border. That strikes me as more flash than substance. That's mostly, I think, there to provide cover when someone like Governor Greg Abbott of Texas tries to argue that he's allowed to act in contravention of federal statutes because he's being invaded. That's a problem, but I think it's actually
Yeah.
a pretty modest one.
Okay.
I'm more worried about a pretty technical order that Trump signed last night, basically all but instructing Secretary of State Rubio to designate a bunch of drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations.
Okay.
And that may sound technical. The problem is that the FTO designation universe opens up a ton, Jen, of economic authorities, of military authorities that I'm not sure.
Freezing assets is what I think of, but you're thinking of the others. Yeah.
I'm thinking of slightly more kinetic stuff than freezing assets, right? And what's troubling about that is sort of two things, right? One, a lot of the post 9/11 statutory authorities that Congress provided to go after terrorist organizations were justified on the ground that there was something materially different about what Al-Qaeda was doing and the threat it posed from ordinary criminal organizations, even multinational ones.
Right, because we're thinking of them as quasi-states, sort of, right, as opposed to just these private actors. It was kind of that liminal space is how I saw it, but
not just that, right? Quasi-states that pose an existential threat to the national security of the United States. And,
sure.
I'm not here to say that the drug cartels don't pose lots of threats to the United States. Of course they do.
Right.
But once you cross that line, that's a very, very hard thing to claw back. So, that too, I assume is going to be challenged if and when Secretary Rubio, some of the executive orders are doing things immediately. And
right.
Some of the executive orders are telling people to do things soon.
Sure.
And so this falls into the latter category, where once Secretary Rubio, assuming he acts on the order, does, that will be challenged in court too. So it's going to be basically a jobs program for lawyers who like to sue the federal government.
Do you know any?
One or two.
I mean, but then, so that, I like how you've done that framing. I want to, into those three buckets, I want to ask you, do you, in terms of the national security one, were you at all disturbed about his trying to say he would lift security clearance requirements over a handful of people? Is that something, because some of the things he said, we all know, like trying to end birthright citizenship with an executive order won't fly. Like that just isn't how the Constitution or how the Supreme Court works. Like we all know, I've read aloud, not just from the Constitution, but from the Supreme Court precedent. So that doesn't worry me. It's more of how that affects the way people treat undocumented people and also anyone who is brown, right? That's more of the sort of, but when it comes to this sort of waiving national security clearance for a list of people whose names I'm not seeing, that kind of concerns me.
Yeah, I mean, so the security clearances went in two directions, right? First, he revoked security clearances for the 50 people who
Yes,
signed
that,
that intelligence committee letter. Um,
yes,
he might get sued for that because the sort of retaliatory, revoking a security clearance on retaliatory grounds, I think is not obviously lawful. In the other direction, I mean, listen, I am bothered by the notion that Trump can just snap his fingers and give people security clearances. Man, I mean, like
but he already had
I,
that right. I mean,
I
right?
mean,
I
right.
mean,
That strikes me as just a horrible consequence of the election and not a
yeah,
legal issue, right? I mean, listen, if Tulsi Gabbard is going to be the director of national intelligence,
right.
you know, that ship has sailed, and it's pretty horrifying that this is where we are. I mean, any effort on the part of the Republican Party to ever again call itself the party of national security, I think
Or
should
law and
be,
order. These,
well,
I mean,
all of these things. But as we're thinking about things that the president does and doesn't have the power to do, right?
right.
The power to give security clearances to people who absolutely should not have them is actually, I think, fairly well established compared to a lot of the other stuff that's going on in these executive orders.
Now, one area you didn't mention, which I've been in sort of chat groups with, is this sort of the orders around gender identity that seem
Yep.
to embed in them maybe personhood at conception. I don't know if you've looked at that language.
Yep. Yep.
And so can you speak to, because some of it, like I like the way the word you use, kinetic, when you talk about international, it matters, but there's also this sort of like, yeah, in the abstract, what they say about, what gender you are, who cares? But in the reality, for trans women in prison, that's a real danger. So I'm trying to sort of sort through among what is sort of performative and what is actually immediately dangerous in the gender related orders.
So I think the folks who are in federal prisons are the first and most immediate targets and victims of this. And there will absolutely be litigation about that, right? And about whether the federal government really can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it remains to be seen how far past that they actually, the administration actually tries to operationalize this executive order. There really aren't that many places where the federal government has a lot to say about someone's gender identity.
Right.
That's really much more usually a local and state thing. I mean, obviously,
A
this
passport
whole
or something, right? I mean,
yeah, but I mean, that will be, I think, like grossly offensive.
right,
Um, whether it's going to actually restrict the ability of individuals to live their lives the way they want to, I think is a separate question.
right,
Um, we should be horrified that the government is going to go around misgendering people. Um, that strikes me as sort of a secondary problem from the sort of the few places where this will actually have immediate, like, real effects, including gender segregation in prisons,
right.
right, including other contexts where the federal government actually is drawing gender-based distinctions, of which there really aren't that many, but there are a few, and that's one of them.
Yep. And when I was talking about this sort of embedded idea of fetal personhood, it was something, and it's subtle, and I don't know if it was intentional, but they define, for example, I mean, this is bizarre, but female means a person belonging at conception to the
Yeah.
sex that produces the large reproductive cells, and of course, male, it means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces a small reproductive cell, which is a very bizarre definition there, ignores intersex. There's so much to say about that, but it almost feels like it's trying to slip in a little idea of a person becoming a person at conception there.
I mean, maybe I will say, it is worth, for all of the crap that got dropped last night. I think it's telling that there was nothing on the reproductive rights front.
Okay.
And so, yes, I think there is a sort of a tonal shift here right, in how the federal government is going to talk about reproduction. But we didn't see anything about mifepristone,
True.
even right, and
Okay, good.
even like a sort of just a hortatory, exhortation to HHS to revisit the
Mm-hmm.
FDA's approval. Nothing about that. Nothing to the Department of Justice about the Comstock Act, right? Even though
Okay.
there's actually a
Right.
really, really horrifying executive order about the death penalty, where Trump is ordering the Attorney General, among other things, to argue for overruling various precedents in the Supreme Court. So, excuse me, I think reproductive rights is actually the one of the only dogs that did not bark last night, um,
Mm-hmm.
which says to me that the administration has not yet fully figured out what it wants to do on that front, and
Mm-hmm.
whether we really are going to see an effort to reinvigorate the Comstock Act or to revoke the approval of mifepristone or other things that are going to interfere with the current law on the ground when it comes to access to
Right.
reproductive care, at least in those states that facilitate it.
Now, this is going to bring a good pivot here as people are thinking, I can imagine I should probably be looking at the chat right now if you guys have questions, but what I'm thinking and what I'm hearing is, a lot of what we will see in the future, beyond the sort of immediate outrage, is this litigation you talk about in the federal courts. And there are many who understandably associate the federal courts only with the US Supreme Court and kind of overstate that they always, this sort of idea that, well, the fix is in, which we know isn't the case. Not every single thing Donald Trump wants to do is going to be blessed by the United States Supreme Court. But at the same time, there's a lot of suspicion about, one, the sitting justices, and two, who might come in now that, as we know, Donald Trump is in office, and maybe now Alito and Thomas will bow out. Is it going to get worse? And so I guess I will allow you, this is sort of the freestyle answer, which is if you want to throw anything in around both corruption and overturning precedent and what we can expect, you can answer this however you want. But I know that our listeners are interested in the corruption and being, sort of talked off the ledge in terms of their sort of blanket cynicism about what the court will do.
So, I mean, I think we should provide a little context first, right? Which is that, President Trump, during his first term, fared remarkably poorly in the federal courts writ large when it came to lawsuits challenging his actions. We may not remember a lot of this because there were some big cases he won. But the reality is that Trump actually had a tougher time in administrative law cases than any of his predecessors. And I think that's relevant because, yes, the federal courts now have a whole bunch more judges he appointed.
Right.
But, right, two things are still true. One, Democrats are going to do to Trump exactly what Republicans spent the last 4 years doing to Biden, which is suing where they can find friendlier judges. We mentioned that the ACLU is challenging.
So not Kaczmarek, I guess, not there.
Something tells me that Amarillo is not going to get quite as many lawsuits in the next couple of years.
Yeah, funny.
But what that does, Jen, is it to some degree mitigates the effect of Trump's appointments on the lower courts, right? Because the plaintiffs who are going to be challenging these policies are going to do their best to avoid those judges.
Okay.
And then when we get to the Supreme Court, I mean, my own view, and I wrote about this in my newsletter.
Folks, tell folks what, because I did link earlier to your newsletter on Blue Sky. What's the name of your newsletter? And everyone should subscribe, but tell us the name because I do subscribe.
So I write a twice a week newsletter about the Supreme Court called One First, which is a not so clever play on the address of the Supreme Court, which is 1 First Street, Northeast. And so,
oh my God, that's so cute. I didn't think about that. Okay.
So it's stevevladeck.com. And the Monday issues are always free, and the Thursday issues are bonus issues for paid subscribers. And what I wrote about right after the election was how, if you look at the Supreme Court's docket for this term, it's actually relatively quiet compared to the last couple of terms. I mean, there are some big cases, but really not the sort of the flurry of big cases that we've had.
Oh yeah, last term was incredible. Yeah.
But right, what I said back in November is, by the time we're done in June, right, what's probably going to be the theme of the term is actually emergency litigation involving Trump. Because what's going to happen is you're going to have all these lawsuits by, the ACLU, by blue state attorneys general, by other sort of, folks who are opposed to what Trump is doing. They're probably, not all of them are going to succeed, but a bunch of them are going to produce, adverse rulings against the federal government in district courts, maybe even, so-called nationwide injunctions that purport to block these policies on a nationwide basis, where you're going to have the federal government and specifically the Justice Department running to the Supreme Court for, emergency relief, for a stay that will put these policies back into effect while the challenges get, worked all the way through the court system.
Right.
And, we saw a lot of this.
So we just pause you in case. So what Steve, in case you guys didn't get that, like what he was trying to say, just in backing up, is of course the plaintiffs can choose their district court, but when these wind up at the United States Supreme Court, right? Because Pam Bondi, we think, is going to bring it up there. The Solicitor General is going to be arguing for her, hoping. And so this is when we're going to really see the Supreme Court. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
No, and I think, during Trump's first term, he actually fared remarkably well when it came to emergency litigation in the Supreme Court. But part of that was because folks really didn't understand it.
Okay.
And there hadn't been a lot of work on the academic front or on the litigation side to explain to the justices why what Trump was seeking was so problematic. That's not true. I mean, so the post I wrote back in November explains all of the things that have changed since 2017, 2018, 2019, that I think is going to make even this Supreme Court a little less willing to just, grant stays left and right and put these policies back into effect left and right. And some of that's because of, Justice Barrett, who has, I think, soured a bit on emergency relief in her time on the court so far. Some of that's because, the justices themselves are now talking about what they're supposed to do in these kinds of cases to a degree that they weren't in 2017, 2018. So, I understand why folks are very skeptical of this Supreme Court.
Right.
I think Trump is going to lose more of these cases, even at the emergency relief stage, than we saw during the first administration, even with this court. And I think that's, he's not going to lose all the ones he should, Jen. I mean, you and I are going to find examples of the Supreme Court blessing things it should not be blessing. But we should not give up on the courts being at least something of a bulwark in these cases, just because it's not going to be in all the cases we want, and just because we think the court's track record is so good by looking at things like Dobbs and the immunity decision. Right. And the reality is that, like, yes, Dobbs and the immunity decision are both really, really problematic. They are not the sum total of what the Supreme Court has done and will do.
Right.
And so, the courts actually, I think, are going to play at least something of a role of a speed break here. But it's going to be fast, and it's going to be in this procedurally complicated technical context where it's, the Trump Justice Department asking the Supreme Court for stays to put back into effect policies that lower courts have blocked.
So two things. I'm going to talk about that and then yesterday's lawsuits. What's hard when you talk about this, because I try to speak to non-lawyers, when you talk about a stay, but then you're actually, what is the status quo change? It depends on where it begins. If I think the life begins before this unlawful executive order is issued, then to me, a stay would be stop it. But when you're talking about an emergency state, the Supreme Court that Donald Trump wants, it means let it go. And so it's so hard to talk. It's so hard to talk about this, I think, when you're trying to communicate to lawyers and non-lawyers. I'll just say that. What I want to ask you is, I was so psyched yesterday to see that my union, the AFT, was one of the plaintiffs in I think, a trio of lawsuits against OMB, and sometimes DOJ was the defendant about this statute, the Federal Advisory Committee Act. Have you looked into those at all? Because I got to confess to you, Steve, I didn't even know there was something called the Federal Advisory Committee Act until yesterday, and I really wish that I had.
So you have to call it FACA.
FACA.
So FACA is one of those, like, great sort of, if you're a DC administrative law nerd, FACA, and nobody else does. It's one of those post Watergate statutes and it's perhaps its most famous example was the Dick Cheney Energy Task Force case back in 2004. But I will say here's another example where we got to be careful to read the thing before we challenge it.
Yeah.
So the assumption was that Doge was going to be this sort of weird, semi-private outside group influencing government proceedings.
Like a
And it
shadow
turns out that's
cabinet.
right. And it turns out that's not actually what Trump created, right? So the
Mm.
executive order that Trump actually signed basically takes this existing office that's in the White House and just renames it. And says, oh, no, now this is going to be Doge as opposed to this other thing that no one had ever heard of before. The result of which is that now it's not really a FACA issue because it's not an advisory committee. Now it's actually an APA question because it's part of the executive branch. And,
Right. So
I
spell
think,
out the APA issues. Is it around the creation, also around how it functions, all these kinds
and
of
what it
issues?
does, right?
Yeah.
So,
It's
so, so
powers.
the reason why folks were worried about Doge as an advisory committee was that it would be effectively exercising power without the normal checks of a government agency.
Like access by employees, open meetings, all
Right.
that.
And
Okay.
now it looks like it actually is going to be a kind of normal government agency in the White House, which will add some complications on the litigation front because it's a little bit harder to challenge agencies that are part of the White House. But it's not now because the problems are not going to arise from the fact that it's not really in the government, right? Trump is making it in the government.
What about that? But he kind of did this stuff with Jared Kushner and got around the federal conflicts of interest statutes. Is he going to do
Yep.
that with Elon in May? Is it going to be the same old thing where they're going to have huge conflicts, but they don't have to disclose?
I mean, he's gonna try,
Yeah.
and this is going to be yet another font of litigation. It already is, right? So
Okay.
my suspicion is that I think there are already 4 at least lawsuits challenging Doge in some way, shape, or form. I suspect those lawsuits are going to sort of shift from Federal Advisory Committee Act
Right.
challenges to sort of APA, Administrative Procedure Act, and conflict of interest challenges. Because if you're going to put it in the government, that
Right.
actually triggers a whole bunch of other rules, which is why you didn't want to put it in the government in the first place.
So they're going to have to amend the complaints and join additional defendants. This is like a civil procedure, like funding case here, or ad law. I don't know.
It would be fun if it weren't so serious.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I have this. My brain is bifurcated between this is a nightmare and oh, can I teach students something? I think you know how that is.
There are pedagogical opportunities aplenty, even as the world burns.
Oh gosh, Steve, that's so sad. So okay, we've got a few more minutes. What is as a parting comments to the folks here? What kind of frameworks or advice can you leave people with so that we remember? And I can share your mantras. I might even break out our interview here into a separate little YouTube thing to watch. And I wonder, or episode. I wonder whether there's something that you could advise us to do so we don't fall into the trap of despairing or also getting sidetracked. Besides, moving to Tahiti or something.
That would be nice. So I'll say 2 things, right? The first is, and we learned this over and over again during the first Trump administration, right? Don't focus on what he says, right? Focus on what he signs.
Okay.
And so, we already have a number of examples from yesterday alone of the daylight between what Trump says he's doing and what the executive orders he signed actually do.
Okay.
Non-lawyers may be sort of terrified of trying to read legal documents like executive orders. Try it. I mean, take a stab, right? Like some of these are actually meant to be decipherable, or at least have to be somewhat decipherable to be effective. So, read what he actually signs as opposed to what he says he's doing. That's point number 1. And then point number 2 is, right, have at least some faith that for as much as the courts have become a lightning rod, there are plenty of judges, and not just ones appointed by Democratic presidents, who are going to have serious problems with at least some of the substance of what Trump is doing and with plenty of the procedure. Right. And that, even though there's going to be, I think, more support in the judiciary for Trump's actions this time around than there was last time around. The project here on the part of the conservative legal movement is about judicial power. And
Right.
judicial power, right, does not necessarily benefit from just rubber stamping like blatantly problematic executive branch practices, because then that sets precedents for future presidents to follow as well. So, it's going to be ugly. It's going to be unpleasant. It's going to be messy. But we should be sort of realistic, Jen, but not nihilistic.
I like that. And I think people want to, just as fascism's appeal is that it simplifies everything, there's this sort of, I feel like there is this discourse of nihilism where people are either bracing themselves so they don't have to feel things, or it's just sort of a clickbait effort to be the most negative. And I think there's a lot of elision and conflation and confusion. And I think on here, on our show, we try to be as clear as we can be and, tell the truth here and have smart people on who are smarter than me and can explain things to our audience. So I'm so grateful, and congratulations on your move from Texas to Georgetown. Are the kids liking it there?
Very much, although not the cold weather, but everything else.
Okay, well, they'll get used to it. And say hi to Karen for me.
I will. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Steve. Bye. Guys, Steve Vladeck is utterly brilliant. I learned so much, and we will follow up on his advice as we move forward. So thanks for being with us, and I'll see you bright and early tomorrow at 8:30. We have another special guest on Thursday, so we'll be able to spend more time tomorrow on Prism. Okay, guys. And I am still, because we always play Crazy Town on the way out. I will do it now. Have a great day.